regarding culture war, like you were talking about earlier, I wanted to kind of ask you something about that. The reason I brought up Daryl Davis earlier was because I think I see that as a way to counter this critical race side of the combat.
Yeah.
Combat. Do you have any ideas of how to combat that?
Yeah, I mean, you need to do two things. One is that you need to call out the ideology for what it is. You need to expose it, and you need to shut it down. So that's the kind of aggressive, more offensive strategy. But that's not really enough, right? You also need to present an alternative model. And the reason I asked is he come from a faith background is because the most successful stuff that I've seen is a different kind of epistemological model, a different kind of theoretical model, a different personal model. It's a reconciliation model, and that comes from a religious background. And I think the distinction we were talking about earlier between the kind of Martin Luther King vision and the critical race theory, Black Lives Matter vision is a deep and profound division. Because if you look at MLK, which is his work is amazing. I mean, he's a preacher, right? He's a Christian preacher. So he comes from a really deep spiritual background. And the civil rights movement was largely driven in the Black South by the Black churches. So they're coming from a Christian perspective that we're all created equally under God. We're all kind of brothers in this, all created in the image of God. The second thing, and this is something a lot of people don't know, is that Martin Luther King was a deep student of American history and in a lot of ways revered the founding fathers, Jefferson even, Lincoln. And you read his writing on this, and it's actually amazing, his essays. And he basically says we're collecting on the promise of America. And you can look even at Lincoln. Lincoln saw himself as doing the kind of Jefferson created the inspiration, but was tragically flawed, couldn't do it in his lifetime or even in his personal life. Lincoln saw himself as fulfilling that vision, and then King saw himself as that kind of third step. The critical race theorists, it's based in kind of German Marxism and atheism. It's a completely different intellectual lineage that goes back hundreds of years. They're not compatible. And I think in my life, I spent 5 years directing a documentary for PBS about the poorest American cities, and the reconciliation model, and in many ways the faith-based model, is one that works much better.
You know, what's really interesting is I had a similar conversation on one of our previous shows about the moral frameworks that we experience the world through. Mm-hmm. And I think whether people realize it or not, most of Americans experience the world through a Christian or Judeo-Christian moral framework, even if they're not religious. So the way I explain this, I'm chilling at my house, and I notice I live in a dead end street. It's like on purpose. And then I see people walking down my block, knocking on every door, and I'm like, I wonder what they're selling or preaching. And then all of a sudden, these two young teenage girls are knocking on my door, and they were preaching. They were there to spread the good word, and they had Bibles and stuff. I don't know exactly which denomination they were. They asked me if I had a minute to talk to them about Jesus Christ and all that. And I told them, I really respect and appreciate what you're doing. I myself am not, I'm not one for, this theistic religion, but I will tell you a few words of praise I have for your religion. Notably, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Specifically, I think it's Sodom and Gomorrah. I will not destroy the city if there is but one virtuous person. That moral framework is the root of the Fifth Amendment, innocent until proven guilty and a right to a speedy trial. From that idea we had a really, really long time ago, rooted in these values, we then created Blackstone's formulation. Are you familiar with Blackstone's formulation?
I'm not.
It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer.
Great.
That protecting the innocent is more important than punishing the wicked. From that, we've created a system that has one of the best justice systems in human existence. I am not a Christian. A lot of people seem to think I'm an atheist for some reason. I don't know why that is. I'm
You're
not
neither.
No, I believe in God. I do.
Yeah.
But I just don't believe in. I grew up Catholic briefly. I'm not. I don't believe in scripture and stuff like that. But I do believe in God. It would be a much longer moral and philosophical conversation I'd have with someone. But I'm not an atheist. I don't think agnostic is the right word. But I started to realize morality for many people in this country. We understand these values. Like, if you ask the average person who's an atheist if they know what sin is, they will say, of course, in a religious context. But if you go to, say, China and ask them, they're going to be like, I don't know what you mean. Unless they've actually studied, Western religion, they have a completely different religious structure. a different moral framework for how they view the world. Critical race theory, the woke, all that stuff doesn't exist within the same moral framework. So like you said, it's a totally different line of thinking compared to the rest of us. I wonder if that is the real split, that even though I'm not religious at all, it's really interesting to see, the old liberal arguments back in the day about religion versus, Christianity, saying that, I'd hear Christians say without religion, then why don't you just go and commit X crime or whatever? And then the liberals would say, like, you need religion to stop you from committing crimes. Whoa, not realizing the only reason they feel that way is because they were raised on moral values that were rooted in the Bible. So the way I always explain it is we want to keep the good and get rid of the bad. And so when you look back at the history, I remember reading about the Fifth Amendment and why we have a right to a speedy trial, why we have a right to remain silent, why we're innocent until proven guilty, the presumption of innocence. And then you start going down the rabbit hole. Then it's like, well, the earlier ideas of Blackstone's formulation, actually Benjamin Franklin said it's better than 100 guilty persons escape. And then I go back even further and then I read Blackstone's formulation was actually from the Bible. It was the story that God would not destroy the city if there was but one righteous person, because you could not hurt that innocent. And it's interesting because then this is in line with deontological philosophy. An immoral act against one is an immoral act you can't commit, versus utilitarianism, which I think now we start getting into the philosophical conversation of critical race theorists seem to be utilitarian.
Oof, yeah.
Kill 100 people if it saves 1,000, whereas the rest of us are more deontological.
Kill 100 people to save one good person. I mean, I think
it's the trolley problem on steroids.
Yeah.
And so for the most of us, it's you're familiar with the trolley problem. I'd imagine. For those that aren't familiar, it's the idea is you've got a train coming and it splits into two tracks where there's 5 people and 1 person, and it's going to kill 5 people unless you pull the lever. But if you do, you'll kill that 1 person. Do you do it? And that's kind of showing you the difference between deontology versus utilitarianism, which is, will you act that will kill 1 person? It could save people. And then the utilitarian is kill the 1 person, save the 5. And it's kind of the trolley problem. There's a bunch of other really interesting ones. I really like that meme where it's like, it's 1 track and there's 100 people. And it's like, you can stop the train at any time, but it would cut corporate profits. Anyway, I digress. I think that we might be seeing that route where we really have utilitarians. They don't care about you. They don't care about your life. They don't care about if you suffer. They care about the collective. So maximizing what they view as good. And then the scary thing is who is actually in control of what is good and what is bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think a lot of times we get in trouble because people say, well, it's just racial sensitivity training, or well, it's just that it's important to look at human life and society through the lens of race. These very naive and kind of very nice sounding, very simple formulations. I mean, that's true. But if you look at the actual beliefs and the papers and the books and all the studies from the critical race theorists, I mean, they're very clear in what they believe. And they basically say the system of individual rights, the system of private property, the system of equality under the law, the system of non-discrimination, all of those things are used to justify collective inequalities. Yeah. And we need to basically get rid of those things, the Constitution that you're talking about, the justice system that you're talking about, all of those complex moral questions that we've been answering for thousands of years. And they basically say, we have the new answer. And the amazing thing is that it always comes back to a kind of very utilitarian, very economic formulation. It's always redistribution of wealth and property. Yeah. They can't get out of that. And you read the papers, you're like, okay, think it through the lens of race. All right, great. Whiteness as property. All right, that's kind of strange. But then the end of it is like, the only solution is to get rid of the Constitution and redistribute kind of wealth along these lines. But so I think that the race theorist is quite interesting, because at the end of the day, underneath the critical race theory is critical theory, is Marxism. And a lot of people will beat up on you about that and say, that's not true. You just think everything's Marxism. But the dichotomy, the kind of dynamic that they describe is oppressor and oppressed. It used to be the bourgeois and the proletariat. America has a large middle class. We have amazing technology. We have happy citizens for the most part, very affluent. Very progressive in the mindset of technology and wealth. They said, oh, that's not going to ever work. We can never have kind of the proletariat revolution to overthrow the bourgeoisie. we need to rethink about this. And then they said, let's graft identity politics onto that Marxist dichotomy of oppressed and oppressed. Instead of bourgeoisie and proletariat, we have black and white or black people of color, because race is two things. One, it's malleable. It's abstract. You can make it into anything that you want. And two, it's extremely emotional. It has a just raw emotional power. And they're saying we can harness that power much more than class-based interests. And that's where we are today.
You know what I like asking people? I usually don't go beyond this because I just like to see what their reaction is. I have friends who are very woke. And I usually, I have a lot of friends from back home. And when they're preaching all this woke stuff, I'll message them and say, I had a question, if you don't mind. Do you agree with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream? And they always say, of course. And then I say, so do you believe we should judge people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin? And then their mind breaks.
Why would they say no to that?
Because they just started posting a tirade on Facebook about how white is bad, or whiteness is property and white privilege. And then my response to that is, do you agree with Dr. King? Well, of course, you're supposed to. It's acceptable. So the reason I'm bringing this up is it's not about your ideology. It's about how people are basically saying whatever they think is socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. However, it is socially unacceptable to say you disagree with Dr. King.
Yeah.
But you can't agree with him and critical race theory at the same time. It's not possible. Right now, they have created this amazing system where you actually have two jigsaw pieces that don't fit together, smashed together, and then wrapped in duct tape to make it work, because they simultaneously hold two ideas in their head. And it's amazing that they can actually be posting about how they want to judge people, everyone, on the color of their skin, while agreeing with Dr. King they shouldn't do it, because it is both socially unacceptable for you to reject either of these ideas.
Like, you can judge people on their genetics. Genetics are a code that read a certain amount of information. So if you want to acknowledge that information,
what do you
defined
mean,
as that.
Judge them on that.
Just say it is X, Y, Z. It is a 1 on this scale, a 2 on this
them?
scale. Yeah, by putting it on a graph. If you want to say this DNA reads G, I don't know what the DNA. Not much into molecular science, but if you want to list their gene code.
But what do you mean by judge them?
By judge it, you would be listing their gene code on a piece of paper.
You don't mean judge then?
No, well, that's a form of judgment. Writing something down on a piece of paper is a form of judging an idea. It's a form of judgment. You've decided this is what it is. And you could do that about every race and every genetic code of every human. So we're different. We're all genetically different.
That's not what they mean by judging someone based on their race.
Unfortunately, I think they take a more superficial thing, and it's like, if I see a color, then I associate it with this.
What do you mean?
Like, they're judging based on the skin color, as opposed to just making acknowledgments about what the genetics are. Yeah, our genetics are different. It's good. Variety is the soul of the future. It's what we, it makes our immune system stronger.
Well, that's actually offensive too, to them. You can't talk about that. Race is a social construct. I mean, there's interesting points we made about the idea of it being a social construct, because we talked about this the other day with this leftist guy, and ideas like, if you have say an albino black person, that person still probably or may identify as black, and many people still might look at them and say they're black. But then you can have actual people like Rachel Dolezal who are literally white but change their hair, and then people just believe they're black. So there are, weird social constructs and assumptions being made about race or whatever. But I think that actually, in my opinion, disproves critical race theory. The fact that a white person, and there's many of them, are currently pretending to be black shows that their ideas about oppression and oppressed aren't true, because they're actively trying to be oppressed. Now, why would that make sense?
No, you're right, but it's a bit more complicated than that. There's a more subtle distinction to be made. We are in a kind of this really bizarre bifurcated social environment where if you're in corporate, if you're in academia, especially academia, if you're in a kind of high education, high status, high prestige occupation, being a person of color is a tremendous advantage. You talk to any hiring manager, this is just a kind of truism. It is what it is. But there's another distinction, though. So, kind of people in academia, you have all these kind of white women pretending to be Latina or black to advance their academic careers. These are like kind
Yeah.
of like low tier kind of garbage academics, but they say this is my ticket to get that great
Or
job.
Elizabeth Warren.
And you see the job listings. A friend of mine is a college professor, and he said, look at these job listings. And it's like, you have to acknowledge the land, you have to be anti-colonial, you have to be this and that. And it's like, to be a professor of anything. So there's status and kind of advantage there. But if you look at people in the lowest economic bracket, the bottom 20%, the bottom quintile, it still is, unfortunately, there still is a racial dynamic, a class dynamic, especially now a class dynamic, where that's not true. So, and unfortunately, honestly, the thing that it really irks me about critical race theory, the thing that to me is like the true moral crime of critical race theory, what it does, it enhances and solidifies the social status of woke elites of any race, but it's an ideology that is deeply destructive to actual poor people of all races.
Yes.
Yep.
It does nothing to raise up people in the poor communities in white Youngstown, Ohio, and black South Memphis, and Latino Stockton. It's a bespoke elite ideology that is self-serving and actually destroys the very foundations of life for poor people in the United States. The two-parent family, the faith community, the habits of kind of work and workforce participation. It wants to obliterate all those things under the illusion that it's oppressive, while at the same time the elites who preach this stuff, they don't believe it. Because look, they're working very hard, they have two-parent households, they're doing all the things that they condemn in their rhetoric. And to me, it's not only hypocrisy, but it's deeply destructive to people, again, of all races, at the bottom.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. So come back to check us out when we go live. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and we are also available on all podcast platforms for free if you want to listen to us there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.